Hello everybody. After a long pause this summer, I came back with my articles. This article is not about politics nor recent events, and this time I decided to realize only the audio and not the video. Let's start. The title is What Entropy Taught Me. Among the most fascinating lessons I have attended in my life, a special place is reserved for the thermodynamics lessons of Professor Giuseppe Spadaro, Professor of Chemistry of the Faculty of Chemical Engineering at the University of Palermo. It was a truly memorable and in many ways unexpected course. In fact, a really large part of those lessons had nothing to do with formulas, elements, chemical bonds, as one would expect from a general chemistry course. They had rather to do with the behavior of the matter. There was little mathematics, and instead there were many qualitative discourses and visual models with which to explain some natural phenomena. It was about thermodynamics and laws of nature. He spoke about matter, open, closed and isolated systems, energy, heat, pressure, volume, gas, liquids, temperature, humidity, mixtures, internal energy, work, enthalpy and entropy. And then there were so many names of scholars, almost all Germans, Britons and some French. Kelvin, Nernst, Joule, Boltzmann, Clapeyron, Boyle, Gibbs, Dalton, Lavoisier, Carnot and others. Without trying to exaggerate the terms, those lessons were the closest thing to the lessons that Greek philosophers held so long ago. Thales, Anaximander, Anaximene, Empedocles, Democritus. It makes very little sense to call them philosophers. They were scientists who, with very poor technological tools, tried to make a logical and reasoned explanation of nature based on their observations. For me, Professor Spadaro was a kind of Heraclitus, and I, casual and lucky spectator, listened enchanted to those truths about nature. But what does thermodynamics study? And why did it turn out to be so fascinating to me? And above all, where do I want to get with this intervention? And again, why is the preamble longer than usual? Thermodynamics is a branch of chemistry and physics founded by engineers, which deals with heat and energy. These engineers, fathers and sons of the industrial revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries, have become engrossed about how to build machines that effectively derive useful work from heat. Their practical knowledge, built in numerous wrong attempts, has in some cases contributed to broadening theoretical knowledge in science. Among these stands the great French engineer Nicolas Leonardo di Carnot, 1795–1832, a young man able to put a bit of logical order and scientific rigor in a subject, that of chemistry, in which, at the time, many magical and superstitious beliefs survived alongside solid and well-founded theories. Carnot wrote about what later passed into history as the second principle of thermodynamics, or the second law of thermodynamics, and to do so he wrote in very theoretical terms about ideal machines of reversible transformations and of perfect gases. Carnot started by observing that heat, which is a form of energy, cannot be obtained without there being a difference in temperature, and therefore to obtain work from heat there is inevitably a need for two heat reservoirs, a hot one from which to take the calorific energy and a cold one, and to which to discharge the heat that has not been transformed into work. Carnot proved that it is not possible to turn 100% heat into work, unless, of course, the cold reservoir is the temperature of absolute zero, that is, at minus 273.15 Celsius, which temperature is practically non-existent in nature. For those who could understand the study of Carnot, that was a bad blow. Not even with a perfect machine efficiency can never reach 100%. there will always be a limit to efficiency proportional to the difference in temperature at which the machine operates. In other words, for the thermal machine, that is the machine that works through heat sources, it is inevitable to waste energy even if it is a perfect one. You can imagine how frustrating this can be, to the point that there have been, and still there are, pseudo-scientists and pseudo-engineers who have proclaimed to have invented engines that belie the second principle of thermodynamics, who were afterwards inevitably mocked for their ignorance or for their inaccuracy in their calculations. The point is that heat passes spontaneously from hot to cold and never vice versa, which means that thermal energy, actually energy in general, tends to degrade. That is, to become less exploitable, and, as you can understand, this is one of the many reasons why the hoarding of energy sources and the production of energy are very important issues in the contemporary economy. Now, explaining the second principle of thermodynamics in the manner of Carnot is not among my capabilities. I also tried to study Feynman's lessons, which was based on the ideal machines of the French engineer, but at a certain point I get lost. Fortunately, there is another way to understand this law of nature, a probabilistic or statistical path, inaugurated by Ludwig Boltzmann, a physicist too far ahead for his time when scientists still did not believe in the existence of atoms, and Boltzmann remained misunderstood for all his life, to the point that this probably contributed to his suicide in 1906. The formula is S equal K, which is a constant natural logarithm of W, and is also engraved on his grave. Boltzmann was particularly proud of it, even if its correct formulation is posterior and is due to the physicist Max Planck. For the profane like me, the important thing is that entropy, S, is proportional to the number of microstates of the matter, W. What is meant by microstates of matter? To understand this, one could take a cue from the so-called principle of Nernst, the principle of entropy equal to zero. According to this theorem, a crystal at the temperature of 0 degrees Kelvin is at entropy 0. Why? Because in a crystal, every atom or molecule is in a well-defined position with respect to the others, and cannot move or exchange the place with another atom or molecule. It is in perfect order. In addition, at 0 degrees Kelvin, every atom is perfectly still, has no thermal energy, so it has no thermal agitation. It follows that the number of microstates is 1, and the logarithm of 1 is equal to 0, zero entropy. This means that every atom that is at a higher temperature than absolute zero is agitated, and therefore has more microstates, that is, it can move and occupy more than one position. As the temperature and therefore the thermal energy increase, the agitation and also the number of microstates that the atom is able to access increases. In short, be sure that if you heat a system like a pot of water, very probably you are also increasing its entropy, its degree of disorder. Here, an intuitive way to understand entropy. It is the degree of disorder of matter. In principle, therefore, given the same amount of matter, if it is in the solid state, it will have less entropy than if in the liquid or gaseous state, in which the molecules are free to move. Okay, this was easy. What does that have to do with the heat? Why does heat always move from hot to cold and never vice versa, for example? For an exquisitely probabilistic reason. Let's assume we have two tiny pieces of metal, one hot and the other one cold, and put them in contact. We hypothesize, to simplify, that both pieces of metal are formed by a single molecule each, and we hypothesize that the hot pieces has 5 possible microstates, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, while the cold one only has 1, 0. Now, this being the case, the possible microstates, taking into account the system of the two molecules, are only 5, respectively 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4. If instead the hot piece transfers a little energy to the cold piece, so that each of the two pieces has 3 microstates, that is 0, 1, 2, at this point the possible combinations increase. Let's see how many are 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 2, 2, 0, 1, 2, 2, 1, and 2, 2. A total of 8 accessible microstates. Now, even if we worked fancy with an extremely simple and idealized system, we have shown that the second option opens the way for a greater number of microstates, and it is therefore more likely to happen. Working with much larger numbers of phenomena observable in nature, the greater probability of an event that brings disorder, which therefore guarantees a greater number of microstates, is so much higher than that of an event that brings order, that the former always occurs spontaneously and the latter never occurs, almost. That the heat can pass from cold to hot is therefore possible, but it is so improbable that in fact it never really happens. It would be like expecting that by drawing a number 1,000,000 times from a set that goes from 1 to 9, it occurs that only the numbers up to 45 are drawn. A thing like that, only even less likely. From here we find that entropy is not only the degree of disorder of a system considered, but is a law of nature. It is one of the main drivers of change in nature. It tells us in what direction a system will probably evolve, namely towards disorder, disintegration, mixing, degradation. Pay attention. Entropy is not the only engine of spontaneous processes. There is also a push of enthalpy which causes a system to tend to have as little energy as possible, a push which, as the attentive reader can imagine, goes most often in the opposite direction to that indicated by entropy. And anyway, the entropic push to disorder is very strong. Why? Just because time flows, and if time passes, events happen, and the most probable events usually happen. Wanting to push us to a science fiction hypothesis, the most effective way to understand if time goes backwards is to look around and see if entropy decreases, if, to be clear, things come back in order spontaneously. Another corollary of the second principle of thermodynamics is that total entropy has been continuously increasing since the universe was born 13,000 billion years ago. This means that when locally in a well-defined system order has been created, the energy used to fix things and to put order has created disorder outside that system. At the end of a process, there is always more disorder than order than before. If you're really good, you can create as much order as disorder. And is there really no way to escape this tendency of nature? No, there isn't. We are condemned. The great Stephen Hawking, who initially believed that as soon as the phase of contraction of the universe began, today we know that there will be no contraction, the universe will continue to expand forever, entropy would have begun to decline and the broken glasses would have recomposed. He speaks of it in his brief history of time, and speaks of his error only as the greatest minds are able to do, with irony and humility. Hawking says that a young scholar demonstrated mathematically to him that even a disorder that contracts and shrinks more and more, the mixture, the disorder, and the degradation of energy will increase. Nothing to do then. Chaos is constantly increasing. All processes involving disintegration are favored. That's why it is so easy to die, but it's impossible to resuscitate. except for the exceptions, of course. Now, for many, this law of nature risks becoming a sort of manifesto to the vanity and uselessness of everything, but it is not. It is exactly the opposite. It is the disorder that has allowed incredible variety of the universe, and in the midst of this infinite variety you can also find life on Earth, a veritable miracle of the highest order. Without the tendency of the elements to mix and combine, all life-giving organic systems would not even be conceivable. To see in the life of the Earth, that is, a very high rate of local order, a sort of paradox in a universal context that tends to disorder, is completely misleading. Without the tendency to greater entropy, be assured that amino acids, along with all the constituents of organic life, would never have formed. Life is a particularly lucky roll of the dice. It would be better to say a series of particularly lucky rolls, but it was a case, like all the other cases that entropy guarantees. Put this way, entropy is not so scary. In fact, I would say it is rather sympathetic, because it brings together different things, gives to those who do not have, and takes away from those who have too much. It is contrary to distinctions and separation. It is anti-elitist. It is libertarian and contrary to conservation. In short, it is progressive. But apart from these sound bites, entropy teaches some things that we should keep in mind. Entropy partly rules our lives and can give us some advice on how to evaluate what we do and what others do. One thing that entropy has taught me is that destroying and building something is not the same. Destroying something costs always less energy than that used to build it. Destroying is always easier than building. You have already experienced it 1,000 times, like when you have made a castle of cards or a castle on the sand. When you have made friends with someone and you have maintained the relationship for so many years. When you wrote something and then you found mistakes or passages that just did not work. When you received a harsh and unquestionable critic on something that you have done with much effort. And then entropy teaches that if you create order, if you build something and you spend time and energy, you're probably doing something useful, usable by someone else in the future. Even destroying sometimes is useful, mind you, but destroying in an orderly manner is always preferable to a disordered destruction, only good to bring havoc and chaos. For this reason, I always appreciate those who strive to build more than those who destroy, but I always appreciate those who destroy in an orderly, precise and analytical way more than those who build up by infusing little effort and energy, and I appreciate even less those who destroy hastily. Here is what entropy taught me. But there is also another corollary, albeit a little less adherent of this second law of thermodynamics. Judging a person from what he proposes and considers just is more effective than judging him from what he criticizes and considers unjust. If it is true, in fact, that building is energetically more expensive than destroying, it is also true that, given an object, to build it will entail few paths and processes possible, and moreover in general full of successive, ordered and precise steps and stages. Otherwise, if you want to destroy the same object, you can find many more ways to do it, which often do not involve many steps or stages. Think of the construction of any brick wall. Who wants to realize the work will have to spend time and put the bricks one after the other in a very precise order, starting from the ground and gradually rising, with great patience, the wall. Those who have the task of throwing it down can choose from a variety of instruments, effective and less effective, and can start the work from different points of the wall, coming earlier or sooner or later to finish the task. A similar thing can be said for opinions and ideas. Having a certain opinion generally implies a certain intellectual effort to arrive at a conclusion starting from other previous opinions and experiences, and through a series of logical steps and reasoning more or less articulated. Personal opinions therefore say a great deal about the person who expresses them, because they imply very precise and recognizable opinions, and also a certain way of reasoning. It is not exactly the same thing to reject or criticize an idea or an opinion. Not that criticizing does not involve a serious intellectual effort many times, even if I doubt it sometimes, but it is not simple for an external person to trace the presuppositions, values, opinions that are the basis of an opposition. In politics, for example, a certain governmental measure can arouse the most bitter criticism from two persons of two completely different political cultures who may be in profound disagreement on any other issue. It is what could be called the illusion of being on the same side. In fact, just because criticism is less characteristic than to oppose, many political parties and politicians prefer to say against what they are rather than what they fight for the simple fact that the former will be able to put together a greater number of voters than the latter. Personally, to know well who I am facing, who I am in front of, in real life as in social networks, or again among public figures, I try to understand what are his opinions, his values, his points of reference. It goes without saying that since I use this little trick, the people who inspire me true trust or that I feel close to are drastically diminished. Here is another little thing that Entropy taught me. Thank you very much, and see you next time.